Welcome to tonight's Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Task Force meeting from the League of Women Voters of Colorado. My name is Kathy Ebersberger, and I'm the chair of the task force. Tonight we have with us Kyle Giddings, who is the deputy director of the Colorado Criminal Justice Reform Coalition. Kyle is a Colorado native with deep roots in communities up and down the Front Range. He's the great grandson of a coal miner from Trinidad and the grandson of a migrant farmer from the San Luis Valley. Kyle draws upon the legacy of his ancestors to inspire him to work towards justice for the communities he's part of today. Working as CCJRC's deputy director, Kyle hopes to work toward developing programs and implementing policies that help justice-involved people have a voice in their communities. Kyle believes that one of the cornerstones to reentry is participating in civic engagement and believes that is why the Voting with Conviction program at CCJRC is so important. Kyle lives with his wife Erica in Capitol Hill, where they enjoy spending time in nature, playing Mario Party, traveling, and going on adventures with friends. So we welcome Kyle here tonight to have an adventure with us, and I'm sure we'll learn a lot. So Kyle had offered to start with some questions if anybody has questions they'd like to start with. We have any questions? Beth, do you have the slideshow? Oh, there's Barb has a question.
Yes, what is the balance or how many, private uh, jails or prison have compared to public, the Colorado Department of Prisons?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. First of all, thank you so much, everyone, for having me. It's always great to join community in this discussion, especially right now when private prisons are such on the front of all of our minds as we face the expansion of private prisons, not only in the immigration detention centers, but also in the expansion that is possibly happening here at the state level. So, to answer your question, there are two private prisons that function as state prisons here in the state of Colorado. That they are Core Civic is the owners, where the immigration detention centers tend to be owned by Geo Group. So Core Civic owns the two private prisons here that the state funds to hold Colorado-based inmates. And now there is an additional 14 prisons right now across the state that are all state-run and state-owned. Now, through the work over the last 25 years of CCJRC, through sentencing reform, as well as working with community across the state, we've managed to close seven prisons, most of which were private prisons. Five were private, and two were state-owned prisons. And so that only left us with two private prisons, one in Bent County and then one in Crowley. And now I saw the slides pop up real quick. When they re-pop up, we can kind of jump in unless if other people have some questions. Oh, here they come again.
Oops.
This is, I
Technology's
feel,
not working at all
yeah,
today.
I was going to say,
Yeah,
I feel like this
it's
is a reflection of the harsh reality we all are living in these days, you know? So,
Kyle, I had a question.
yeah.
What are the rules and regulations and procedures completely different for like the Geo Group concentration camps in Colorado versus the state or the private prisons?
Yeah. Yes. So in the state-funded private prisons, the oversight is still the Department of Corrections. And in the end, is the oversight comes from the House and Senate Judiciary Committees who have oversight of DOC. And so there's been some recent stories out of the private prisons that are funded by the state, specifically in Bent County, where there were multiple murders. And we're hearing some rumors of some pretty horrific stuff out of Bent County. And so we're trying to work with the legislature to be able to go do some accountability as well as figure out what the heck is going on in Bent County. Where on the federal side, most of the accountability comes from the uh, the the individual congressmen and congresswomen that the facility is in that district. But we've seen over and over again that there's been a lot of issues getting access to those, as you put it, concentration camps. In many ways, they are very much so concentration camps, especially hearing about the spread of disease at the Geo facility in Aurora. It's just, history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure as heck does rhyme. And so it is curious. We're curious to see how we can translate some of that oversight into more accountability with the Geo facilities here in Colorado, or the core civic facilities here in Colorado. So a private prison in Colorado has to reach the exact same standards as a state-run facility, which we believe they don't. And so we're very curious to see what comes out this legislative session as well as the interim around that issue.
I saw the slides there for a minute and then they disappeared again, Beth.
Yeah, I'm working on it.
Okay.
I don't know why this is so difficult.
Someone wrote a question in the chat about how we stop Hudson.
How do we stop Hudson? Yeah, I would say the tactics that David Seligman is doing right now around local control of the land and the fact that the local board ruled that if it ever changed anything from a private prison, that they would have to then rezone it and reapprove the use of that facility is probably the best route because there's no state law we could pass. We've tried to in the past to find ways to stop private prison expansion through the legislature, and we were just unsuccessful finding one that was seen as constitutional by the Ledge Council. And I believe they also have a desire to figure out a way to regulate private prisons a lot more on the state level. I am not sure the success we will have if that contract is not with the city or with the state, because something that not a lot of people know is that when a private prison is contracted on the state level, it's actually contracted directly with the community it's in. So the state contracts with with the city of Hudson if we had taken over that Hudson facility. And then the city will then contract with the private prison. It's like there's a middleman there. Um, and for I don't think it's the same with the feds. And so it'd be curious to see what kind of regulations we come up with to be able to hold private prisons accountable.
And I think ICE is now in the process of making that more an initial owner as a federal government and then contracting with the operator. So there's even less ability to regulate the owner.
Yeah, I believe it.
You want to start with this, Kyle, or
Yep, this works. We can. Obviously, you guys are not the ACLU of Colorado, and I apologize. That should have said the League of Women Voters. I didn't. I was reviewing it earlier today and didn't catch that. So, hello, League of Women Voters. Appreciate you guys being here. We can go ahead and move on to the next slide. There we go.
Success.
So, hey, we got this. We got this, guys. Like, This is what, persevering in dark times looks like at its best, is overcoming the dark lords that are Adobe and PowerPoint slides and stuff. So yeah, our mission. So CCGRC is our mission is to eliminate the overuse of the criminal legal system, advance community health and safety. Most of us who work at CCGRC, which there's only 6 of us, are either directly impacted by the criminal justice system, are survivors of crime, or families or and allies, or both. I think, let's see, 1, 2, 3 of us are directly involved or were formerly incarcerated. I am formerly incarcerated myself. And then the rest of us were either directly impacted, or family members or loved ones were impacted by the criminal legal system. Next slide. So mass incarceration in Colorado. Can you skip to the next slide? So U.S. incarceration is the U.S. incarcerates more people than any other Western democracy. And you can see in this slide, Colorado actually incarcerates people at a higher rate than the rest of the United States does. Now, outside of states like Louisiana and then even Texas, I think, ranks up there pretty high. But if you look a little further down, Massachusetts is in kind of the middle amongst South Africa, Colombia, and they are considered the gold standard for incarceration inside the United States. They have really low incarceration rates, but even then they still rank amongst South Africa and Colombia. South Africa being a former apartheid state, and Colombia being a country with a criminal justice system that is overwhelmed with corruption. And so that makes us kind of reflect on ourselves, like, why are we like this and how did we get here? And we're going to focus a little bit on the United States picture, but specifically on Colorado tonight. Next slide. So when it comes to all the United States, Colorado ranks kind of in the middle. We're not the worst, but we're certainly not the best. But you can see states like Minnesota, Louisiana, um, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Idaho, huge incarceration rates. Um, uh, and a lot of that is connected to a lot of the draconian laws that came out of Reconstruction, related to Jim Crow era reforms to increase prison populations to create more labor for farms and former plantations, as well as an onslaught of the war on drugs. There are certain states that decided to double down on the war on drugs policies, not only relying on federal policy, but then also relying on local state statutes to increase penalties for low-level drug possession and use. And so you can see that really reflected in some of these states, specifically Louisiana in particular. Louisiana's incarceration rates and being so high are directly connected to the end of the Civil War and the Jim Crow era. And it was just last year that they were fighting on the ballot and were successful at defeating on the ballot a ballot measure that would have sent juveniles to adult prisons and made that the standard across the state. So Louisiana has a lot of work, but if you can see here, Colorado kind of ranks in the middle, and our state's in a crisis when it comes to the Department of Corrections that we're about to get into. Next slide. So yeah, mass incarceration is not normal in the U.S. It's a relatively recent phenomenon. Policies from the 70s and the 90s, including the war on drugs and tough on crime era policies like mandatory minimum sentences and 3-strike laws, fueled explosive prison growth. As you can see here from the graph, the state prison population exploded dramatically when the tough on crime and war on drug stuff started picking up, and then during the Nixon era on the especially specifically on tough on crime. That era has just launched us into the Reagan era, and even the Clinton era. We had tons of increases in the prison population across the board. Now, then there was a huge movement to decrease population because they saw it wasn't working, as well as it's incredibly costly to incarcerate people in the United States, and also incredibly costly to not only the economic terms, but to families and individuals. And so there was a real movement to decrease populations until honestly recently, when we've seen a real uptick on the war on drugs again, as I'll get into a little later, as well as the increase scrutiny about reforms and what we've been doing to change the system. Next slide. So, how did Colorado get into this current situation where our prisons are pretty much at capacity and we're facing the reality of possibly having to buy a new prison? So, it goes back to 1985 and the Milky Bill, which the Milky Bill doubled the maximum presumptive prison sentence for all felonies in Colorado overnight. Lawmakers expected a minimal impact, but within 5 years, the prison population literally doubled. The bill and other get tough on crime bills triggered decades of unprecedented growth in Colorado's prisons, leading to honestly the creation of CCGRC. Um, in 1999, we were reached out by Rupert Penfield Tate and Rupert. Oh gosh, now I can't remember her name. I feel awful. She's a former state senator from Boulder. Judy Amabile currently has her seat. Um, about how the fact that since they had been at the legislature, all they had done was defund K-12 to build prisons because of the Milky Bill. And so we got together and we ran the first prison moratorium bill in the country. It lost miserably, but that's when Colorado was a much different time. But it set us on this huge trajectory that has reached this point, where the reforms that were able to get passed because of people realizing that the Milky Bill went too far, as well as changing things like possession charges, theft charges to reflect the total value stolen instead of just the act of a theft, and like really creating responsible data driven penalties. Next slide, please. So yeah, let's take a look here. 1985, the Milky Bill passes. The prison population was 3,586. And then in 1990, and you can see after the Milky Bill, it just continued to double and go up and up and up and up. 2007, in 99, CCGRC was founded. Hooray. And then in 2007, the Commission on Criminal and Juvenile Justice, CCJJ, was created. And it finally gave us the opportunity, even with us pushing back as hard as we did and organizing reforms, to really do some legitimate criminal justice reform paired with DAs, the public defender's office, victims advocates, and community advocates, and the justice reform groups, being able to get together and reach compromises to be able to pass real reforms that everyone was okay with. And so they would write the bills, they make the recommendations, and then CCGRC would take that bill and run with it. And we would work the legislature and get it across the finish line. And now you can see it peaks in about 2010, 2011 at 22,980 and starts really decreasing. And then in 2020, 2021, the COVID era decarceration efforts happened, dropping from 20,000 to 15,000. And ever since then, we've been fighting to keep it as slow as we can on growth. And we see there's a real uptick here, starting in about 2025, leading into where we are now at 18,406. Next slide. So here are the prisons across the state. Don't worry, you'll get all of these this slide deck sent to you guys, so you don't have to memorize and write all this down. But those are the prisons that currently are in the state, as well as the closed ones. So Huerfano at the very bottom there, not too far from Trinidad, is in the city of Walsenburg. And that is the one that is likely to reopen if we are forced into a position where we have to reopen and we don't manage our population well enough. And for people that don't know, Huerfano has been closed for almost 10 years. and it is in really poor condition. Um, when the Department of Corrections came to propose to buy it, they wanted they needed $200 million just to buy it, and then they needed at least $60 million more just to renovate it. And we think that's honestly a really low estimate, because the same week that they announced that they wanted to buy Werfeno is a closed core civic facility, so it's a closed private prison. Um, there are no formerly state facilities that are closed that are still on the market, could be reopened. All the closed state facilities have been gobbled up by other state agencies and turned into other things. So the only closed prisons available for purchase are private prisons. And so the same week that they announced that they wanted to buy the Werfeno facility, Walsenburg's water system collapsed and was not people weren't able to access. There was a boil order, and then on top of that there was the um they had to take showers in the state park that's right outside of Walsenburg. And the part of their water system that failed, that caused the whole city, which is only a city of 3,000. And so if they open Werfeno, it would add additional 1,000 people to their population. But the part of it that broke was the part that was built for the private prison all those years ago. And so Werfeno is in rough situation. And we heard over and over again from community and people that were formerly in the Werfeno facility that the issue of brown water was not unusual. It was more likely than not that when they turned on the water was brown. So we are trying to find all the different angles to sue if they decide to open this facility, to stop it from being purchased or even leased. Next slide. So let's get into the DOC budget, because I think this is the part, we can be philosophically opposed to the Department of Corrections and the practices within it, but when it comes down to it, we really need to look at what they're spending their money on. So next slide. So this is the DOC budget. And you can see in 1985 started at $57 million. And as for the close of session this year, it is at $1.2 billion. And it continues to grow. And, every budget was cut this year, usually pretty substantially in a lot of ways, but the Department of Corrections got an extra $100 million, and we gave the private prisons like Core Civic an additional 20% raise per diem. So per day, they get an extra 20% for every person that they have in facilities, and not to expand access to treatment or develop new programming or anything like that. That's to do nothing more but to exist. They got a 20% raise this year while we were in the middle of cutting children's health care and stripping at-home caretakers of their hours. Private prisons got a raise. There was an attempt in the House to move that money back into children's health care that was successful in the House but failed in the Senate, sadly. And so that is the reality that we're in. Next slide. So this is the population overlaid the budget. This is my favorite chart that we make, not for good reasons, unfortunately. But what drives the costs mostly of the Department of Corrections is staffing and medical care. Because medical costs have gone through the roof, and the Department of Corrections has not been able to maintain high levels of staffing in any facility. In some situations, like Sterling, 70%, no, 82% of the medical staff is vacant. And so they rely very dependent on outside contractors, which cost way more. And unfortunately, the only people in this country that have a constitutional right to health care are people that are incarcerated. While I'm a big proponent of universal health care for everybody, this is where the Supreme Court has determined is the only place where people get it. So every dollar of medical care provided to inmates inside of the Department of Corrections comes from the general fund. And currently there are 3 people who are elderly and should be in a nursing home on special needs parole or something like that, or a compassionate release, who cost the state $2.5 million in healthcare every single year. 3 people, that's it. Next slide, please. So what did prison expansion look like this year? The state requested 788 male beds across 3 facilities and 153 male beds in the privates for a total of 941 beds. So we were able to hold that hostage to get, we were able to convince JBC members to vote no on those beds to expand our ability and have leverage and power over the governor and his budget to be able to get some real reforms passed this year. So we were able to get 4 bills, which we'll get here into a little bit. But at the very end of session, the Joint Budget Committee set aside $4.9 million to allow the DOC to potentially lease 200 beds at the Werfenau Correctional Facility. And that's the current fight going on right now. They haven't come and asked for those beds yet, but we're expecting them to, and we plan to fight them full force. Next slide, please. So yeah, let's talk about what they're signaling towards the future. So this is directly from the governor's letter to the JBC from Mark Ferrandino. Given the forecast caseload and the state will need to increase bed capacity for safety of our staff and offenders through the lease, purchase, or construction of additional space. We're currently identifying any existing facilities that may be available for purchase or lease. And then these measures may include the utilization of sled beds. This is what they're threatening to do if they don't get using sled beds, increasing the local jail backlog, and contracting with in-state and out-of-state providers for additional beds without permanent increases in capacity. DOC may need to deploy these solutions on a long-term basis. So what they're threatening to do is put people on sled beds, which is like a long plastic sled looking bed that they then would like triple bunk people, or they would start shipping people out of state to other facilities, which we used to do back in the mid 2000s. But it hasn't happened for a long time. But these things that they're threatening are really unnecessary, and we'll get into that why in a second here. Next slide. The current crisis. Next. Yeah, so DOC is facing 3 interconnected challenges: insufficient bed space, ongoing staffing shortages, and limited ability to deliver programs and client care. We released 2 reports over the last couple of years about the crisis that is happening inside of the Department of Corrections. Both of those reports were partnered with COINS, which is the union who represents the Colorado Department of Corrections guards and staff, as well as a group called One Voice United, which is like the national prison guard and staff union. Next slide. This, I actually need to reform it, but the prison projections are saying we're going to get back up to the former level that we were by 2032, if nothing changes. Now, just 2 weeks ago, they announced that the prison population projections are actually going down, which is great. That's where we want them to be. But if we hadn't changed anything or changed any of the laws, we would have been right back to where we were in by 2032. Next slide. So these are the key bills that were passed this past session that really changed how we are going to be able to deal with the problems. One being the prison population management measure. Requires DOC's actions when prison vacancy rates fall below 4% for 30 days. So if they fall below then it triggers all these mechanisms, which I won't go deep into detail. Like I said, I'll send these slides out or Beth can after this, so you guys can read about it. But it top line is what it does is it forces folks to really change how they work with people inside of the system when the system is almost at capacity. So it helps cut through a lot of the red tape to help people who are just stuck in purgatory for parole, help them get on parole and back into community and getting their life moved on. And these are only the folks that are low level offenders and folks that are already pretty close to their parole eligibility date. Helps like develop procedures to give people more earn time, to help them get out. It is a handful of other things, which if you guys really, really want to, we can spend some time one time going deep into the prison population management measures. It's like a 60-page bill, so it's one of those kind of bills. But then Senate Bill 159 is increases the amount of earn time that people get. So right now, it would increase the monthly earned time credits available to many people in prison to 2 days additional. So that doesn't sound like a ton of time, but 2 days adds up pretty darn quick when people are facing really long sentences. And those sentences, so it can have, and the DOC also has the ability, if they're a really behaved and well performing inmate, to be able to go back and retroactively give them those earned time days based on what the statutory changes are. So that those are two bills that passed. Next slide.
Kyle, can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
Why is the inmate population increasing? That's what I don't understand.
Yes, absolutely. So there are two main reasons why the population's increasing so much. One, the parole board is not letting people out. Discretionary parole releases are down 15% this year, which has a huge impact on the population. And now they're saying, oh, that's because there's not enough housing, or come up with some pretty ridiculous reasons why to deny people parole on top of that. And so we're saying, great, there's not enough housing, let's invest in reentry housing. They're like, no, let's just build more prisons. And we're like, that's not a long-term solution to this problem. And then they have also just straight up starting letting less people out. And in my personal opinion, I think that is because of orders directly from the governor to the parole board, telling them to let less people out. There was, when COVID happened, Governor Polis signed this executive order that decreased the population by thousands, as you saw. And it was such a wide and expansive executive order that we told the gov's office that we would not sign that, because we felt like it put too many people on the table that maybe shouldn't be on the table. If we want to do it right, let's do it right. But he still signed it anyway. And several of the people that got out, two to be exact, got out, committed some new very heinous crimes. One person killed his parole officer, and another person did a double homicide. And ever since then, Governor Polis has not really worked with us on criminal justice reform and has really pulled back. And suddenly the parole board is not letting as many people out, who the parole board is appointed by Governor Polis. So we think that had a really big factor in why less people are getting out, because this is very unusual, the decrease in the amount of people being let out. The second is technical parole violations. It's so things like failing a UA, or missing a case manager meeting, or losing your job, or was another one. Missing a phone call from your case manager. All those things are technical parole violations, and all can be reasons why you get sent back to prison. And that is the second largest pinpoint of increase in population in technical parole violations. So those are the two driving factors, because we all have seen the data that crime has gone down. Crime is down. And even court commitments, so new people being sent to the Department of Corrections, are either down or the exact same as they were the year previous. And so month to month. And so it's not a new crime wave that is driving the population. It is the decrease in parole revocations and more people being sent on technical parole violations. And when you get sent back for a technical parole violation, you can be sent back for the rest of your sentence. It's not like you're being sent back for 60 days, 90 days, something like that. No, you can be sent back for years. And what we've seen from the reports is that that's what's happening. Is people are being sent back for the rest of their sentence on a technical parole violation, something incredibly simple, and something I don't think if you had committed such an offense on probation or anywhere else in society, you're not going to prison for years. So it is those are the two driving factors for the population growth.
So who decides that? Is that the parole officer, or does it have to go before a judge?
It goes back in front of the parole board. So once again, the parole board. It all comes back to the parole board. And we actually think the parole board is the current composition is actually against the law because it's supposed to be only 2 representatives from law enforcement and then folks from community, people like mental health experts, or it says pretty much anybody else, but only 2 from law enforcement. And we changed the law to specifically have that. So like law enforcement wouldn't dominate the parole board. And currently, everyone that's sitting on the parole board has a law enforcement background or corrections background or probation background, all these things. Yeah, so that is the parole board. It all comes back to the parole board, just to say. Next slide. Yeah, so what is also a looming crisis is the fentanyl ballot measure, which the League of Women Voters is wonderful in so many ways, but you guys are ahead of the game in taking an opposition position to what is now Prop 132, actually. So the fentanyl ballot measure is being framed, it's from Advance Colorado, which is a dark money conservative group here, funded by corporations as well as the richest people in Colorado, like Phil Anschutz. And they also get a lot of funding from the Walton Family Foundation and like the Daniels Fund, all these big conservative funds. It is top lines for Prop 132 is that it will make all fentanyl possession a felony, even if you don't know, even if it's a first time case. A person sharing one pill would face the same mandatory 8 to 32 years in prison, which is the highest level drug trafficking. It eliminates the unknowingly clause inside of the law. So the illicit drug supply is tainted with fentanyl. Even so, people are buying one thing and thinking they're getting that, but turns out that their drug has fentanyl. And I often try to remind people about the case that happened in Commerce City a few years ago, where there was a group of cousins that were doing party drugs. That turns out they were laced with fentanyl, and everyone in that apartment died of an overdose. And now fentanyl is a crisis, and we are worried about it. And it's something CCGRC has worked on since 2020, before many people even knew what fentanyl was. But this measure would not help with that. It would just treat a teenager who's at a party experimenting with drugs, who unknowingly has fentanyl in their drugs, the same as a drug trafficker, charging them with 8 to 32 years in prison. It will send upwards of 900 more people to prison a year and cost the state $433 million in just the first 5 years alone. And it is expected to increase overdoses. We had a peer review study done by 41% in those first 5 years as well. And so the fentanyl ballot measure is just a return to the war on drugs, and the same policies. And it is also just a private prison cash grab, because the one thing I've been talking about through this whole thing is that the state prisons don't have capacity, and they're looking to expand capacity in the privates. That is the only space that Colorado has to expand. So all 433 million of that will likely go to the private prisons, not to treatment. Not a single dollar of this ballot measure would go to treatment. It's not funded at all through any sort of tax measure. And so all 433 million of that would come from the general fund, come from our healthcare, our K-12 education. And if you guys have been paying attention at all to the state budget, we have $4 and 3 raspberries to get anything done. And those 3 raspberries are very sour and very expired at this point. And so this will be devastating to Colorado's budget, to our brothers and sisters struggling with addiction, with the increases in overdoses, as well as Colorado's future, all in the name of lining the pockets of private prisons whose lobbyists donate to Advance Colorado. Those are our existential crises that are facing it. So we are organizing the Vote No campaign. I'll plug that here at the end, where we can get you guys plugged in more if you would like to. Next slide. Yeah, so we organized the No More Prisons Coalition, which the League of Women Voters is a part of as well, which we're about to reactivate again here as soon as we get word that they're coming in and asking for more beds. We have one, mobilized opposition to the DOC budget, two, supported legislation reforms to reduce the prison population, three, protect community reinvestment funds. I'll get that into a second. And four, mobilize opposition to regressive ballot measures and initiatives. So community reinvestment funds, CRI funds, CCGRC strongly believes that we can't just change policy and change the laws to fix the mass incarceration problems that are across our country. We have to invest so much money back to where crime really is prevented and where crime is being dealt with the most, which is community. Community is the front line when it comes to dealing with crime. So over the last 15 years, CCGRC has moved about $130 million out of the Department of Corrections and the parole budgets back into community for reentry work. Recidivism is a big issue. So people, if they don't get plugged into programs, once they leave the Department of Corrections, have a 36% likelihood of returning to prison within the first 3 years. People who participate in the Wages Grant Program created by CCGRC only have a 2% recidivism rate. 2%. That is fantastic. That is like pretty much the recidivism rate of anyone in community. And then we've also created crime victims assistance funds that focus specifically on communities that tend to be left out of the conversation when it comes to victims' rights and victims' compensation. So we're talking about BIPOC communities, young adults, men, as well as queer communities are all getting funding through this crime victims assistance fund. And then the Transforming Safety Grant Program takes money out of the Department of Corrections as well as the parole and moves money directly into community at a very local base. It's not like we're taking this money and putting into the Department of or the local police station or the local sheriff's department. No, this money goes directly into community. So when I say directly into community, I'm talking about there are groups that are like 10 or 12 square blocks of a city making the decisions on what they think public safety needs to be for their communities, for them to feel safe. And that's where that money goes into be invested. And it might not always present as like, oh, we need more police or we need more streetlights. Sometimes it's like things like small business loans. And so giving economic mobility for local communities to build the infrastructure that they think they need to be able to keep their communities safe. Because in the end, community knows much more what they need to be safe than a big government does. Next slide. All right. So thank you guys so much. Happy to answer questions.
We do have a
Would-
few questions.
Yeah, I see some
here.
questions. Would love to answer some of these.
Marcella says there's plenty of people in our prison system who have disabilities. For
Yeah.
these individuals, they're not in the best environment. It may be the easiest placement administrative-wise, or because there was no other choice. We need to be proactive and solve this issue as it's a human and civil rights issue. Do you have
Yeah.
any thoughts on disabled people in prison?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been on the front lines of passing what is called special needs parole or compassionate release, which is specifically for people with severe health problems, not specifically mental health problems, because unfortunately falls into the competency world and the civil commitment world, which becomes much more complicated. If anybody's been following that, I can touch on that a little bit, but people with severe health problems. So people with extreme, who are terminal illnesses like dementia or Alzheimer's, as well as cancer or any other kind of disease. So we've been in the front line of developing that to get people out of the prison system and into the um, back into community. The problem we're running into is that if they don't have somewhere to go, there's nowhere that will take them because there's not a single nursing home in the state of Colorado that accepts people with felony convictions, which is, another problem we should probably figure out at some point. Because that means Kyle here is never going to qualify for a nursing home at some point. But if people directly leaving the Department of Corrections with high health needs need somewhere to go. And so we're working with Senator Mobley, as well as Senator Weissman, and several other people to develop a plan to bring this company called iCares, which is a non-for-profit corporation that sets up healthcare facilities specifically for high needs folks, not only from the Department of Corrections, but for competency beds, as well as other referrals from like state hospitals or local hospitals that have people with high needs that have nowhere to go, so end up living in the hospitals. And so we're trying to figure out a way to create a Medicaid rate that they would be able to work with to start opening these facilities. They exist all over the East Coast, and the Department of Corrections in Rhode Island and Connecticut, and I can't remember the third state right now, all um, feed clientele into these facilities, and they come highly recommended. They're specialized in working with they don't even have crime exclusions. The only thing they look at is if you have a arson charge, and that's not an automatic disqualification. They just look closely to see if that's something that they'd be able to work with. But no crime exclusion. So these people would have somewhere to go. The civil commitment issue, I think we could spend an hour talking on, and is a huge issue. And they just passed this huge bill last year that had $30 million in it. I don't think it actually fixes much of the problems. I think it adds more staff, but not more beds for people with severe mental health issues. And it's a real civil liberties issue, as you said. State of Colorado spends millions of dollars a year 55 millions to be exact, in fines because of how long our competency list is and the lack of care people are getting.
And so when people would go into, like you say, into the compassionate care program
Mhm.
or even people that are on parole, does that end the requirement of the Department of Corrections to provide medical care?
Yeah, that's correct. So they are relieved of their duty to provide medical care, and then those people just get enrolled in Medicare. And so it
Mhm.
would cost the state way less because then we get matching funds from the feds because the federal government does not supplement anything related to corrections.
Okay.
And so it would be cheaper for people to be in these nursing homes than inside the Department of Corrections.
Okay. My guess is that the large prison population consists of people of color. Is that true?
Yeah, white folks still make up a majority of the prison population in Colorado, but black and brown folks are overrepresented in the population dramatically. 4% of Colorado's population is black, 17% of the population of the DOC is black here in Colorado. Hispanic men and women make up 28% of the population, but represent 36% of the population in DOC. Excuse me. So definitely huge racial disparities, without a doubt.
Okay. Christine's going to a fundraiser for Phil Weiser soon. What should she ask him about his plan for the parole board and prison management in general?
Yeah, the number one thing we should be asking Phil Weiser right now is, do you plan to clean house? Because there is no level of the Department of Corrections leadership that isn't corrupted. Corrupt is too strong of a word, but isn't broken. And the current leader, Andres Sanchez, is inadequate and isn't leading at all, and has helped just guide this crisis along to where it is now. And so that's the question we should be asking Phil Weiser. And I would love, Christine, if you get an answer, is plan to clean house in the Department of Corrections?
People typically do great when they have the right supports, thinking of consistent support to reduce recidivism.
Yeah.
What kind of support are people getting in the state prison system?
Almost none. Um, so, and that, that goes to back to the staffing issue. Um, every single prison is understaffed, hands down. One second, I got to cough really hard.
Okay, go ahead.
I got that awful summer cold that's going around.
Oh, there
My
you
kid
go.
got it, and then he gave it to me and my wife. So I'm on the tail end of it, but got to tickle my throat. The staffing issue is a huge issue. So much so that teachers, case managers, and like maintenance workers. So the teachers and case managers, people supposed to be teaching rehabilitation classes or GED classes or any job training classes, and the case managers who are supposed to be helping them develop their parole plans or helping them get plugged into resources did 42,000 hours of security shifts last year instead of their actual jobs. Um, and one way that the DOC is working through to avoid having some of this stuff reported is that they don't have to report a class canceled if if it is canceled within 30 minutes of when the class is supposed to start. So, what we've been told by the union stewards at the Department of Corrections is that they are being told that they have to wait until 30 minutes before the class starts and then they cancel the class to go do a security shift. That way, it doesn't have to be reported. But we are hearing over and over and over again from letters from people on the inside that they are not getting the resources they need to succeed. And one example is a fellow who needed to take one class before he went on to parole, and he wasn't. And then suddenly his parole eligibility date arrived, and he had to take that class, so he didn't get released on parole, and he didn't even get enrolled in that class for 8 weeks after his parole eligibility date, and it's a year-long class. So it's just inefficient and the lack of resources. And the head of DOC has said that there is unlikely that they will return to the staffing levels before 2020 ever again, mainly because people don't want to work in the Department of Correction.
So when they take money for additional beds that they say they need, and some of those beds are private and some of those are public, what it sounds like there's not even programs to take it out of. So what is being cut?
Yeah. So when they demand more beds, that money comes from like Medicaid and Medicare funding. It comes from K-12 funding. It comes from higher education. Um, and then that money goes into the Department of Corrections, gets shuffled around 100 million different ways. But even with the beds that were requested this year, this extra 941, they only requested an additional 12 staff members for that 780 beds for the state facilities, which is wild because according to the calculation, the equation they're supposed to be using, they needed an extra 122 staff members.
Oh man.
Um, yeah, and it's bad. There's no other way to put it.
So is their budget I think this is what you're saying. Their budget is all staff. There's no budget
Yeah.
for the prisoners.
Yeah, there's it's staff, healthcare, and the programs is the thing that is always sliced and diced a million different ways to
Okay.
supplement wherever they feel like they need it. Overtime for staff, stuff like that.
Okay. I thought I saw a bill this year about captive consumers that would have applied to prisons,
Yeah.
about commissaries. What's that commissary money used for?
It's supposed to go back into, it's supposed to be a self-feeding system. So they use the
Okay.
money that they earn to buy more materials to turn around and sell to folks. Um, but there needs to be an audit. There was recently an audit of the DOC, but they didn't audit the books, which we really think they need to audit the books because there's a lot of money that just appears and disappears at will that no one can explain to us. So it's supposed to be a self-feeding program, and any real profit is supposed to go to prisoner programs, but we don't think it's going there.
Okay. And do you think the higher prices there are just exploitative, or are they because of just the market area that the prisons are in?
Yeah. Uh, that is $1 million question because I would say the prices might not be intended to be exploitative, but are completely unreasonable for the wages of someone who's inside of the Department of Corrections. Because if you are an unassigned job, you make $5 a month. A month. A medical copay, they have to pay their own medical copays, is $5. So you got to
Okay.
choose between deodorant or going to see the doctor. Um, in some cases, you get your yearly stuff checked for free, but if you request an appointment, it's $5. And your monthly wages are $5. The highest monthly wages inside of the Department of Corrections, outside of some very rare circumstances, are in the $20 to $25 a month. But when you have to buy deodorant, um, any real form of soap or paper or stamps or pencils, or you have to buy all of that yourself. I mean, if you're not getting any money from anyone at the outside, a bar of soap is a third of your monthly wages. Um, so I think there is going to be some reforms coming down the pike this next year around medical copays to kind of ban them, um, and we'll go from there.
Well, I don't know if
So,
it's the
go
same
ahead.
in the county jails, but when my brother was in the county jail recently, and I went to put money, commissary money in for him, it turned out the first $35 would be taken automatically to cover fees.
Yeah, yeah, just excuse my French, just for shits and giggles. Honestly, never really explained for what. But yeah, when I was in the county jail, uh, if you didn't have money in your books to pay for a phone call, a 15-minute phone call was $22, which is insane. Now, phone calls will be free inside of the Department of Corrections, but not in the county jails, which is a different conversation that we need to have, county by county.
So, what percentage of the prison population has somebody that can put money in their account?
It's estimated about 30 to 40% of people are receiving money from the outside. That's it.
So what do they? I don't understand. It sounds impossible. What do they do? I mean, how do they exist?
They don't exist very well. We've seen upticks in violence, in regression, and people being sent to what is the hole or isolation. We're seeing, the Department of Correction is a pressure cooker right now with the population issues, this lack of staff, the lack of resources, the lack to classes, the lack to access to community again, um, is becoming something that is going to boil over. We haven't had a riot in Colorado in many years, but it's starting to feel more and more likely, if I'm being completely honest, which breaks my heart, that we are like quickly going down a path of um, some really bad stuff that's going to happen.
Okay. What
I
about
wish I wish my conversations and my like talks had like happier endings. But like this is just the dire straits the Department of
yeah.
Corrections is in.
What about access to visitation and stuff like that? Is that available or for their families
Yeah.
or
So it is available. They passed a law 2 years ago called the right to hug. So it is a lawsuit, or it was a law that required the Department of Corrections to make sure access to visitation was still available and couldn't be taken away for as a form of punishment, except for in the most extreme cases, like if you caused violence inside of a facility, something like that. But like refusing to, there's also another lawsuit that just had a huge win on the End Slavery Coalition, which bans slave labor. Like if you guys might have remembered a few years ago, we passed a constitutional amendment to ban prison slave labor, but it didn't stop. The governor was just kind of like, "That's cool," and continued with prison slave labor. They saw it more as of a symbolic measure than an actual state policy. And so they sued and they won. And the judge ruled that the Department of Corrections was practicing slave labor and forcing people to work when they did not want to work, which is the basic definition of slave labor, especially when that person doesn't have the right to leave. Um, and so there have been some real big wins, like, and these bills that we got passed, like there's a second look bill that would allow people who've been inside of the Department of Corrections who've served at least 30 years of their sentence, who are over a certain age, to be able to get a second look and be resentenced to get out sooner. These are people that usually have committed crimes of passion or, excuse me, um, higher level crimes. I'm not gonna lie, but they've already done 30 years of their sentence at least. And we also passed a law that made it to where, you know, oh, this will get you guys really riled up, I think. There's this program called JCAP, which is a program to help juveniles get out of the prison system sooner, who were sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. There was a Supreme Court case that ruled that life without the possibility of parole for juveniles was unconstitutional. And so they needed to have their sentence readjusted. So Colorado created a program for people to go through a bunch of like reentry training and job training and life skills training, because a lot of these folks had already been inside for 20 plus years, even though they went in as juveniles. Once they completed those courses, they went to the parole board. The parole board got to make a referral to the governor's office for clemency to be resentenced. Um, Almost all of these folks have been recommended unanimously by the parole board to Governor Polis. And for the past 3 years, there have been 12 to 14 guys. We don't know the exact number because we're not allowed to know, but we know of at least 12 and as much as 14 guys who have passed all their classes, been referred unanimously to the parole board, from the parole board to the governor for clemency, and he has not released a single one of them. But he did, the same week that two of those applications were submitted, he did release Tina Peters on clemency. Um, and those none of those guys have been released yet either. Um, they will be released in the next 3 weeks, though, because we passed a law making it to where if the governor does not take action within 60 days, that the parole board's decision is final and they are released. So they'll be released in the next few weeks, but Governor Polis has not touched in years, in years. So these guys completed these programs and have just been waiting in purgatory. The guy who cuts my hair, Mikey, he's fantastic. Our R&R Head Lab, go there. It's fantastic. All formerly incarcerated folks. He was the last person to get out on that JCAP program, and he hasn't. And it's been 6 years. So
Wow.
yeah.
Let me see. And are they being released from prison? There needs to be a mentoring program. So,
Yeah.
as they're being released from prison, is there a mentoring program?
Yeah. So Wages Partners, the grant program I brought up earlier, has a mentorship program, peer-to-peer support programs that help people with mental health problems as well as substance use problems and just general like returning to society. Some of these folks who get out have never held a cell phone, have never interacted with computers before, or anything like that. And though you would think I had never interacted with a computer based on how well my day's gone today. But yeah, and so they need a lot of peer-to-peer support. And so that exists within the Wages program. But the number one thing the Wages program is missing is space, is capacity, is housing. And it's the thing we keep pounding away at, saying we need to invest more money into the housing part of Wages. And we just keep hitting a brick wall. With the current governor, we will try with Phil Weiser, though.
Can the public donate personal items like soap and deodorant?
Sadly not. The Department of Corrections does not take public donations.
How about library books? They have
There
library?
used to be a book program. I'll have to check. They discontinued it during COVID, and I don't know if they ever brought it back. But I will double check and let you know.
Okay, one of the things when you and I were talking earlier this year, you mentioned food insecurity. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Within the Department of Corrections, or
Yeah, in
yeah.
the
Oh,
Department of
yeah.
Corrections.
food insecurity is a huge issue that so many folks are dealing with. And the one place that is it's become incredibly prevalent is within the youth offender system. So there's like a youth prison, which is like an awful concept to think about to begin with. But about 2 years ago, the head doctor there was doing some BMI tests amongst a random selection of the inmates and decided that they were uh, too heavy and decided to cut everyone's food intake by 25%. Doesn't matter what your BMI was, your cut was food was getting cut 25% because one doctor made a decision that that's what's going to be. And it got so bad that there was a youth that went into full renal failure and was he's I think being returned to the YOS system, but he was in Denver Health until very recently because he needs a kidney replacement. He's on full dialysis every single day because of the lack of nutrition. And so the legislature did a surprise visit down to the YOS facility once rumors started spreading, and they discovered large groups of youth who were being starved. And then the parents who tried to put money on the books of those kids of commissary so they could go buy some food, um, they were starting to do that. And so the youth offender system, which is not under the Department of Corrections, fun fact, is under human services because they're considered closer to the foster care system rather than the Department of Corrections system, banned commissary. And so people weren't able to get their kids food. Kids were starving. We got a report that they did increase the food, but the quality of food is still abysmal on top of that. And so, and that's just in the youth offender system. Amongst the adult system, we see the lack of nutrition across the system causing major health problems, which just increases the cost of incarceration, causes major health problems. And what you have access to in the Department of Corrections food wise is lots of carbs, small amounts of protein, and lots of filler in between. Think potatoes, rice, heavy gravies, like none of it's good, period. Like the food's just not good. And it's not it, as someone that used to work in the kitchen at the Jefferson County jail, some of those things are I'm actually very hopeful that this will be changing because Sheriff Marinelli, I think, is doing a really great job out there. But when I was there, it was some of the food was labeled not for human consumption, and that was our only access to protein. Um, and it was dreadful.
Okay. Let me, somebody's got another question. Let me get the chat again. That decision should never be made by one person. The subject
Agreed.
matter should be used as a news report. I think there were some news reports about the youth system.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you talk about when youth come out of the system, what happens when they're turning to the age of majority? Do they need legal guardianship? What is their status?
Yeah. So they will, once they turn 18, they can be in the youth offender system until they're 21. So it really depends on their sentence. So if they are sentenced to like 15 years and they go in when they're like 16, 17, something like that, or even younger in some unfortunate cases, because Colorado allows kids as young as 10 to be charged as adults, which is disgusting in itself because they're 10 and don't understand anything about the world. But either way, they can stay in the youthful offender system until they're 21, and then they're transferred to adult prisons. Um, their parents are still their guardians technically and are allowed to make health decisions, but every other decision about that individual's life belongs to the state.
Okay. Does anybody have any other questions? I think Carol's been here quite a while here, since the program started. I would like to thank you. I think all of us are a little stunned by what we're hearing.
Yeah.
We've paid attention to the detention centers for immigrants, but I know, at least in my mind, I always thought the state prisons were better, and they're not as much better as I thought. And
Yeah,
we'd love to have you back when you come up
please.
with your legislative program for the next session.
Yeah.
Um, and I really appreciate your time, and thank you very much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. And once again, the fentanyl ballot measure is the existential threat. It will undo 25 years of CCJRC's work in a single night. And so go to noon132.com, join the fight, sign up, get the facts, share it with your friends. This is not a way to fix the fentanyl crisis in our country. It is a private prison money grab. And it's important that we educate every single one of our neighbors to let them know that what this actually does. So thank you guys so much tonight for having me. I appreciate you guys, and I look forward to meeting you guys again. And hopefully next time I can share something way less depressing about what's going on inside of the prisons.
Thanks very much, Kyle. I appreciate it.
Thanks again, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Kyle.
And thanks,
Bye,
Beth.
Beth. Yeah, thank you, Beth.
You betcha.